Great. So, welcome to our AFLT info session. I really appreciate you making the time. I say let's jump right into it. So, my name's Juliana. I use she, her pronouns. I've been with Matriculate since 2019, and I'm currently the manager of leadership recruitment. So, you've probably received some emails from me already. Genuinely, my favorite part of this role is connecting with students and having the opportunity to work with our amazing advising fellow leaders across our 16 partner campuses, seeing the ways that they, shape Matriculate on each campus in a unique way, seeing the ways that our students are so passionate but to their roles and the way that they really grow over their time with us. So I just want to really emphasize that I'm a resource for you throughout this application process. I absolutely love getting to know each and every one of our students, so my email's up there. Please feel free to shoot me an email at any time. We can make time to meet one-on-one, whatever you need to determine what's the best path forward for you and your unique goals as a leader with Matriculate. Do not hesitate. Also, this is a small group, so throughout the info session today, feel free to interrupt me at any point. This info session is for you to walk away with more confidence about what you want to do with your Matriculate experience. So please use the chat, interrupt me. You don't have to wait till the end for questions. Awesome. So, little overview of how this next hour is going to go. I'm going to start with an overview of the AFLT role, and then we'll do an application overview of the application process. Then I'll share some perspectives and quotes from students who have held the AFLT role themselves, and then we'll end with closing and questions. So let's talk about the application and onboarding process. So some of you may have already started your eligibility form or your application in advance of our deadline this Sunday at midnight. That's awesome. I love to hear it. So first off, in order to be eligible for the AFLT role, you have to be a current advising fellow. So with the exception of our new campuses, so we have some fellowships that we're starting next year. Obviously, if those students haven't had the opportunity to be an advising fellow yet, you wouldn't expect them to be. But barring that, if you're not at a new campus, we would expect you to be a current advising fellow who's in good standing. These are volunteer positions, but we do offer a stipend with all of our leadership roles. So we need to ensure that our students are able to be legally compensated in the United States. If you have a question about your legal status, if you're an international student, or have any other situation, feel free to send me an email or stay on after the call and we can figure out what that might look like for you. And then we also ask that you're on campus and enrolled as an undergraduate. Our roles are also open to all class years, AFLT. So after you fill out your eligibility form, just to make sure you meet that criteria, super quick, only takes a couple of minutes, then you'll get routed to the application. So the application consists of short answers. The three categories of skills that we're evaluating throughout the entire application and interview process are leadership skills, organizational skills, and interpersonal skills. Something I want to highlight here is that we use a single application for all of our leadership roles. So let's say you're not exactly sure what position is the best fit for you. You don't have to go through the labor of completing multiple applications. You can check multiple roles, and we will consider you for all of those positions with the same application. And we definitely have students that move fluidly between leadership roles throughout the process. So let's say you started off applying for AFLT, then in our interview, we realized you would be a great fit for HAF. Is that something you're interested in? There's opportunities to move within that. So keep that in mind if you're not sure. I always recommend applying to multiple positions. You're not locked in by any means. So in addition to those short answer questions, then we have a performance task. The performance task is attached to the application, so it's nothing separate you have to fill out. It's going to be the final aspect of your application, So the performance task is intended to really mirror the types of scenarios that we see in our leadership roles. So it's really an opportunity for you to demonstrate what your approach to problem solving is like. So it's not like we're looking for a particular right answer. the correct number or something like that. We're really just looking to get a better sense of how you approach leadership and what you would bring to the role. So in your performance task, in terms of like an application tip, I always encourage students to just be as specific as possible. And I also think the performance task is a good opportunity for you as an applicant to say, okay, if this is the type of situation I might be facing as an AFLT or HAF, reflect on like, is this something that appeals to me? Is this the type of situation that I'm interested in being in as a leader? It's also a good way for you to kind of start evaluating the role and thinking about what questions you might ask during your interview process. So then for the AFLT role, we move on to the interview. So you'll have your first interview with a student. So that will be somebody that has leadership experience with Matriculate. That's really great, I think, for our applicants. I always try to remind people that not only are we interviewing you, but you're interviewing us. You're interviewing the AFLT role, right, to decide if it is the right fit for you. So I encourage you to bring your questions. I always love when I'm interviewing someone and they ask me a hard question. I really appreciate that level of, intentionality and thoroughness. Then in some cases, not in all cases, excuse me, you'll have a second interview, and that will be with a member of Matriculate staff. And similarly to the performance task, interviews are really an opportunity for us to just elaborate on what we've seen in your application. You'll have the chance to expand on some of what you've already said and to just kind of give us more context about who you are and what brings you to the role. That was a lot, so I'll pause there just to see if anybody has any questions. Sweet. Well, if anything comes up, feel free to use the chat, interrupt me. Let's move on. So now that we've talked about what the application consists of, let's talk about what are the skills that Matriculate staff and student reviewers will be looking for as we read your application and conduct your interview. So I really want to emphasize here the idea of skill potential. So these three categories of skills: leadership, organizational skills, and interpersonal skills. This is really what we'll be looking at throughout the entirety of your process, so in the application and the interview. So these are the exact skills that your reviewer will be using on a rubric, but we really do not expect students to come in confident in all of these areas. The same growth mindset we like to bring to our advising fellowship, we bring to our leaders. So I would never want this to be a barrier for somebody applying who's passionate about the role. If you have never had a leadership role before, that is totally fine. That is often precisely why students are drawn to these roles, because they haven't had those opportunities and they want to start seeing themselves as a leader and start growing those skills. That's great. One of the main things I look for as a reviewer is really just like self-awareness. So, me as someone working for Matriculate for, the past 3 years, there are things that I know that I need to work on. I have not mastered all of these skills, far from it. So really making sure that students are just able to self-reflect and grow. And if you have any concerns about any of these categories or are curious about the ways you can show these skills in your application and interview, feel free to shoot me an email if you're working on a particular application response and you want to talk about it. But again, I'll probably repeat this an unnecessary amount of times, but it really is focused on growth. And these are the skills, not only the ones we use in evaluations, but the skills you'll use throughout your time as a leader. So we'll come back to these. We like to have our leaders set goals. Maybe somebody really struggles with management, giving constructive feedback, delegating, things like that. If that's something they really want to focus on, that's what we'll really put our time into. So that's another thing I really love to see, how students really tailor the role to what they're most interested in and what they most feel like they really need to work on. So now that we've gone through the applications and the skills, let's talk about the role itself. So the AFLT role is about a 9-month commitment, and I divided the responsibilities into 3 buckets here. So first we have the recruitment process. So a huge aspect of the AFLT role is recruiting and selecting the next cohort of advising fellows. So you'll be really a huge part of the implementation of recruitment. So figuring out how are we going to connect to students on our campus? How are we going to build relationships with other organizations? How are we going to motivate students to learn about Matriculate's mission and complete their applications? You'll also be directly interviewing and reading the applications for incoming advising fellows. So you'll play a really large role in shaping who that fellowship community becomes. So that will take you from the summer training period all the way through end of November. Then after recruitment, you have that really exciting moment of like welcoming your advising fellows, seeing your cohort for the first time, and then helping them throughout their training process. So supporting advising fellows to complete the online training course, to attend their live training session, and to run their ACE, their advising skills evaluation. Then after they're done with their training process, it's time to do certification. So that's finishing up every last piece of everything from the acceptance paperwork to finishing those last ACEs so that students are ready to meet with their high schoolers. And once all of the advising fellows are completely through certification, that's when the AFLT role starts to wrap up. So then what you'll do is help us in terms of giving feedback and providing resources for that next cohort. So let's say collecting all of the social media templates you developed, giving us program feedback on your own training process, your own leadership process, so we can take that feedback in to improve the role for our next generation of leaders. Any questions here about these three different buckets or how the timeline works? Awesome. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. So now, here are the recruitment responsibilities. So recruitment, as I said, really is a big part about, a really essential part of the AFLT role. So the strategy, our AFLT and head advising fellows will meet on a weekly basis. You'll have team meetings to discuss how your management is going, how your collaboration is going, what your goals are for the week. You'll track your recruitment progress. So let's say if you have a goal of recruiting 60 new advising fellows, you'll look at the application pool that you have and assess where you need to go. Another big part of that is your recruitment vision and your recruitment values. So what's the type of language you want to be using with prospective applicants? How do we want students to feel? What really having that values-driven approach, not just trying to hit a number or target. Then we have recruitment implementation. So each AFLT will manage a different aspect of recruitment. That's, I think, something that students really appreciate, the opportunity to specialize in something that they're interested in. So you can really think about like what resonates most with you. So some students are more interested in managing like social media and digital recruitment. Some people are really confident with individual outreach. So having one-on-one chats, text conversations with students, answering questions. Some students maybe are really interested in logistics. So like planning events, ordering food, stuff like that. And among your team, you'll kind of delegate those specialties. And really like work together to have that holistic recruitment approach. And then lastly, we have our advising fellow selection. So that I would say is another big aspect of that time commitment is conducting application reviews and interviews and helping students like persist throughout that application process. So now we've talked through all of these responsibilities. And something else that's really important is what support do you have to be successful in these roles? That's a lot of responsibilities that I just went through. We don't just train you and then send you on your way to do it independently. So I'm going to walk through some of the resources and support that Matriculate provides for our leaders. So first we have office hours. We have weekly office hours as Matriculate staff. These are open to all of our leaders to attend. In the fall, there'll be multiple office hours sessions per week with different staff members. So you'll have an opportunity to, jump on, ask any questions that you have, give feedback that you have, receive feedback. I always really appreciate those kind of informal opportunities to connect with students or just to say hi. I love it when I'm kind of just sitting on my office hours and students will just join in to just, update me on what they're doing and how things are going. Then we have professional development. So as I said, we really try to tailor the leadership roles to our students. So the skills that you're most interested in working on, we really want to collaborate with you on growing those skills. We also are available to talk with you about, letters of recommendation, provide references, help you access other college access organizations or different types of orgs that we may have connections with. And then challenging situations. So this is pretty vaguely worded, but this is kind of a pretty broad umbrella term just to let everybody know that if there are ever emergency situations or challenging situations with your advising fellows or your leadership team, we do not expect you to handle those alone. You have staff to support you if there's an emergency or just when there's, we have students that sometimes need to take a step back from their role for whatever reason, and we're there to support you on that as well. Next, we have content and resources. So we have really extensive leadership training. You've gone through the advising fellow training, so you probably have a sense of what that's like. So we have, resources, toolkits. We also will pair students up with experienced leaders. So there's really a lot of support to get you feeling confident in the role. Then also you have one-on-ones with your head advising fellow in order to give them feedback and discuss just how things are going for you in your role. And then there are also opportunities to collaborate across fellowships. So that's something that I really love is giving students an opportunity to connect with leaders across all of our different campuses, sharing resources, troubleshooting common challenges that are faced. There are also potentially opportunities for people to come together in person, obviously COVID pending, but that's something we've been able to offer in the past, in-person leadership retreats. The past 2 years due to COVID, it's been entirely virtual, but I'm hopeful that this year we'll be able to go back to that in-person model. So that's something that people, I think, really appreciate. And it's also just great to see everybody just build friendships and get to know each other. Any questions here? Feel free to throw things in the chat. Cool. I'll move on for now. Oops. So I'm not going to go into this slide in super great detail because I think that could take a very long time. But my overall goal here is to say, regardless of the specific leadership role that you hold, there is a lot of not only shared goals, but also collaborative work across all of Matriculate's leaders. So in the fall, everybody is working towards that common goal of recruiting a quality and diverse and inclusive class of advising fellows. In the winter, everybody's looking to support advising fellows to persist throughout their training. And in the spring, everyone is working towards certification and towards preparing to recruit and support a new class of leaders. So I'll pause to give you all a second to read the rest of the slide. There's a lot of content there, but if you have any questions about the way that these roles kind of overlap with each other, you can feel free to ask them, but otherwise I'll just give a minute to read the slide and then we'll move on to our leadership quotes and perspectives. Cool. So now we're going to move on to the advising fellow leadership perspective. So I just have some quotes here that I wanted to share from one of our feedback surveys from our AFLT. So these are just perspectives from students themselves about what have been some of their most meaningful aspects of the AFLT role. I also just in general really want to encourage you to reach out to the leaders on your campus to get their perspectives. I may work on the matriculate staff side of things, but I've never been in HAF. I've never been in AFLT. There wasn't matriculate when I was in high school or college. So really hearing those student perspectives from people that have, balanced these roles with their existing workload, with their social life and other extracurriculars, and also people who know the unique culture on your campus in a way that matriculate staff doesn't necessarily, I think it's a great resource. And if anybody isn't sure about how to go about reaching out to their leadership directly, but would like to do that, again, you have my email, so I'm happy to facilitate that. And so just for some common points on this slide, I think one of the things people really appreciate about the AFLT role is that moment when you start to see all the work you've put in result in like a bunch of advising fellows in a room, or on an online call, seeing the cohort of students with a huge, array of backgrounds and motivations for applying to matriculate and different academic majors and areas of passion and expertise. Seeing that like come together after truly like putting in a lot of work to make it happen, I think is something really rewarding. And now I want to share some kind of best tips and practices and some things that people found, challenging, because there are challenges with these roles. I don't want to sugarcoat it and make it seem like this perfect experience. So, we are students talking about the things being stressful, these roles with their other responsibilities, the number of emails, LOL. I appreciate that one because, you've probably already gotten some emails from us. So we do like to communicate, and definitely being, organized with communications, I think is really important to being successful in the role. But, that feeling when you just don't want to get another email. I relate to that. And then people talking about, how interviewing is time consuming. So I think it's rewarding, but, it does take time to sit down with somebody one-on-one and ask them questions and take notes and evaluate their application. And then I really appreciate that, last person's best practice of being patient, being organized, and being realistic with your expectations. That's another thing that I'm very passionate about in terms of our professional development program, is talking about things like perfectionism and burnout and imposter syndrome and how students are caring for themselves. I think especially in the past 2 years, it's cliche to say at this point, but there have just been like really profound challenges and disruptions to people's lives. So making sure that we're not seeing matriculate like in a vacuum of some kind and we're supporting students holistically is really important to us. So those are just some initial leadership perspectives. Again, I will continue to plug talking to your leaders on your campus to get their takes on the best and worst parts of their experiences and everything in between. But I'd love to open it up now to your questions. What concerns do you have about the AFLT role? Anything you'd like to know? Any feedback about today's info session? Any questions about the application and interview process? This is really your time, so I'd love to hear from anybody who has a question or concern. You can feel free to unmute or use the chat. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I have a question. I don't know if this was covered towards the beginning. I had to step out for a little bit, but what's sort of the timeline for completing the performance task after submitting the application?
That's a great question. So the performance task is actually attached to the application. So you'll complete those at the same time. So it's just like the last question of the application instead of like a more generalized short answer is a performance task. And there is a word limit on it, and we ask that students spend no more than an hour on it. And we really do mean that. We don't expect like the most thorough answer and, the most beautiful prose you've ever done. So that you'll just submit that with your application. Great question.
Yeah, I see. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions?
Yeah, I actually have a question. I don't know if I caught this in the very beginning, but so after we submit the application, did you say like there's an interview process that we go through?
Yeah, so after you submit your application, it will be reviewed, and then some folks will move on to the interview process. So you will have an interview, most likely first and foremost with a former student leader, so somebody who has experience as an AFLT member or an HAF. And that's really helpful because not only will they get to know you more, but you'll be able to ask them questions about their perspective. And then for some students, but not all, depends on like the individual candidate, depends on the applicant pool at your school. There will be a second round interview with a member of Matriculate staff.
Okay, and will that AFT member be part of our campus?
Not necessarily, no. Yeah, so there will be it's a pool of like former leaders across all campuses, so you can be paired with anybody from your fellowship or a different fellowship. It's a great question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Any other questions? Cool. If anybody has questions that they want to ask after one-on-one, you can feel free to stay on. And if you have like a particular situation or things just come to mind. I'll also put my email in the chat again. So if things come up or if you want to schedule time to talk later, that's absolutely doable. So then we have our application. How do AFLT responsibilities change over the year? That, I'll go back one slide. That's a great question. So I'm going to go back actually to this slide. So I would really say this is the best way to kind of look at the AFLT responsibilities overall. So really in the summer you have your training, then in the fall you have that recruitment and selection process of the advising fellows. So really focused on like outreach, connecting with other orgs on campus, spreading the word about Matriculate. Then you have in the winter, you have your training process. So helping to develop content for that training. So like community building for your advising fellows. You're also doing a lot of just community building in general, like having a welcoming event for your AFs, getting them to start building relationships with each other, building confidence, building their content knowledge about what Matriculate even is, and then also supporting them in their training process. And then we have certification. I would also call this period, in addition to certification, it's like kind of a feedback period. So you're helping advising fellows with their ACEs, their advising skills evaluations. So you'll actually be running ACEs as an AFLT member. And you'll also just support them to make sure that, you know, at the end of the day, they're ready to support high schoolers. They're ready to be paired with their high school students. And then you'll also be giving a lot of feedback to Matriculate as a program so we can continue to iterate and innovate on our leadership resources. That's a great question. Great. Yeah, of course. Thank you, Angelina, for your questions. So we have our application deadline coming up this Sunday at midnight. I will also say, I know for a lot of students, there are midterms this week, or some folks are trying to enjoy their well-deserved spring break this week. So if the timeline is not feasible for you and an extension would help you feel that you're able to submit a quality application without stressing yourself out or stretching yourself, stay on the call and we can absolutely figure out an extension. But I'm really excited and hope to review all of your applications in the coming weeks. But if you have any questions, again, you have my email. Really do reach out to those leaders. But I would love to see you all apply, and I really appreciate you making the time on this Friday afternoon or Friday late morning or evening, wherever you're located. But I'll hang out for the next little bit. But yeah, I appreciate your time, and I can't wait to read your application.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was just wondering, is there like some sort of attendance form that we have to fill out?
Well, actually, we'll just use the Zoom attendance, so you're all
Okay.
set on your end.
Perfect. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.